and speak from the heart.
Commuters are facing delays this morning following an underground electrical fire in central London yesterday. A number of major roads around the area in Holborn are still closed. LBC senior reporter Tom Swarbrick is there.
Steam still rises, New York style, from the manhole covers along Kingsway. The place stinks of burnt plastic. Fire crews and police have been here all night securing the area, with many roads still shut, causing major traffic problems. Separately, more than 100 firefighters were called to an industrial estate in Park Royal last night. 2 major incidents in the last 24 hours. Tom Swarbrick, LBC, Holborn.
Gunmen have attacked a university in Kenya, killing at least 2 people and wounding 29. The masked men stormed a college campus at Garissa University. 9 British people could be deported back to the UK later after being arrested in Turkey on suspicion of trying to cross into Syria. It's understood the 3 men, 2 women and 4 children have been held at a police station in the south of the country overnight. A union says increasing numbers of teachers are being abused online by both students and parents. 60% of teachers say they've had sexist, racist or homophobic comments posted about them on Facebook or Twitter. At 8:45, the FTSE was up 17 at 68.26. And LBC weather. Early showers for London and the southeast. Sunny spells and outbreaks of rain later on. Highs today of 9 degrees. Dry with hazy sunshine across central and eastern England. Cloudier but staying dry in the north. Scotland will have sunny spells. Patchy light rain though for southern England, Wales and Northern Ireland. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Lisa Aziz.
I tried a different breakfast today with Belvita. I washed my hair, dipped my face, packed some clothes into a case, found my lost earrings under my bed. Because I was doing sit-ups, obviously. Tidied up, watched the clock, saw the time, had a shock. Been waiting for this trip for far too long. Made the train, missed the rain, scanned my tickets for the plane, and I got bumped up to first class.
Complimentary drink, madam.
Sweet!
Belvita breakfast biscuits.
Morning win.
This is LBC, leading Britain's conversation. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. LBC's Election Call.
Morning at 9 o'clock on Thursday, the 2nd of April. Election call in just a moment. I should tell you also in the course of this hour, the latest betting on the runners and riders ahead of the big debate tonight. And of course, you can hear that debate on LBC and full analysis as well. We'll get the odds. Who's top now, currently? Who's the most favoured candidate and who's lagging on the rails? In other stories, we'll go back to the news of the runaway Britons being held in Turkey prior to deportation that might even take place today. Certainly that will start. And the challenges of teaching in schools where so many children have English as an additional language. But to election call, and each day during the campaign, we're giving you the chance to question a senior politician about issues that matter to you. We'll hear from all the main parties as Britain decides. This morning, I'm joined, as I often was, by the Deputy Prime Minister and Leader of the Lib Dems, Nick Clegg. Good morning to you, Mr. Clegg.
Good morning.
I shall be speaking to you later about your preparations for tonight. How excited are you?
I'm looking forward to it. Why not? I mean, I always look forward to any opportunity to tell my side of the story. So let's hope I can make my voice heard over the cacophony of other voices on that stage tonight.
Well, we might get a curtain raiser on that, but prepare yourself for your first call. David is in Enfield and you're through to Nick Clegg. Go ahead, David.
Good morning, Nick. Good morning, Mr. Clegg.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
My question concerns our balance of payments. The coalition is boasting about its success in running the country's economy during the past 5 years. However, last year, the deficit on our current account of the balance of payments, it reached somewhere, I think, around £98 billion, which was the highest ever recorded in actual pounds as well as the percentage of GNP. And it was 3 times the deficit of £38 billion recorded when the coalition came to power in 2010. So in simple terms, this means we're increasingly unable to pay our way in the world. So my question has 3 parts. Why has this happened? Why are no politicians discussing this in the run-up to the election? And thirdly, if you became Prime Minister in May, how would you restore international accounts to a surplus?
So, David, you can slice and dice this any way you like, but the most conventional way of doing it is to talk about our deficit and indeed our debt They're separate, of course, as a percentage of our overall wealth as a nation. And when this government came into office, our deficit was just over 10% of our what they call GDP, gross domestic product. It's now about half that, but it needs to go down further. And most especially, what I think is important that we need to get rid of altogether is something called the structural deficit. The structural deficit, forgive me for all the jargon, slightly unavoidable in this area, but the structural deficit is the bit of the black hole in our public finances that won't just be kind of removed through the growth of the economy. In other words, you actually have to actively take decisions, either make reductions in public spending or increase taxes in order to remove that structural deficit. Now, we had hoped, you're quite right to imply this at least, David, we had hoped at the outset of this coalition government 5 years ago to get rid of that structural deficit entirely by now. But we haven't. We haven't for various reasons. Tax receipts were much lower than we'd anticipated. Growth was lower for a bit. What we have achieved is we've reduced the deficit by half, and my party is going into the general election, as you might know, with a plan to remove the remaining bit of the structural deficit by 2017-18. Then we will have cleared the decks finally, so that we can sort of move forward, start investing in public services in the normal way, and not saddle future generations with the kind of mistakes of this generation.
David, a response from you.
Yeah, well, you're not answering my question. My question isn't about the budget deficit. My question is about the deficit on the balance of payments. And what you said about reducing the balance of payments deficit by half from 2010 is simply incorrect. So please answer the question. Why has our balance of payments deficit increased so much?
Well,
not our borrowing deficit, our balance of payments deficit.
Well, but David, you may insist that the balance of payments is the crucial thing. In my view, actually, the most important thing for a developed economy is to make sure that for day-to-day spending on the things that we need as a society, we pay for it. We don't borrow for it. And that is what we're... Well, I know, David.
But you're not answering my question. I'm not asking about public sector borrowing requirements. I'm asking about the balance of payments, and it is very important because it means that we are not paying our way in the world. That we are spending £98 billion a year more abroad than we are receiving from abroad.
But David, you know as well as I do that the balance of payments, as far as our trade is concerned, is dependent on, of course, what we export, but also, of course, what we import. And I'm very happy to have a discussion about whether you think it is essential to always export exactly as much as you import. It doesn't tend to work like that in an international trade system. Sometimes sometimes you export more, sometimes you import more. I know you don't like the fact that I'm returning to what I think is the most important fiscal issue of all, which is not actually the balance of trade, but is the balance in our public finances, because you can't spend money that you don't have, which is in effect what we've done in the past. So I accept, of course, that the balance of payments, as far as our trade is concerned, fluctuates. That sometimes we import more, and that's of course driven in part by things which are not entirely in our control, which is the strength of the currency. When the strength of the currency increases, of course, it is much easier for us, because it's more affordable to import goods from elsewhere. When the currency goes down, the reverse happens. That is just one of the laws of economic nature, and there's something that government can do about that. There's quite a lot, frankly, that governments can't. What we can do something about, where we are sovereign, is deciding on what money we raise and what we then spend it on, and ensure that we cut our cloth accordingly and spend money only that we've got.
And what we can also do, David, I'm sorry, I know you want to go on, but I must move to other areas, and we've got so many people who want to speak to Mr. Clegg, so we move on. David, thank you for your call. John's in Northwood. You're through to Nick Clegg. Go ahead, John.
Good morning, Nick. Why should I voted Liberal Democrat last time in 2010, but, I did not vote for the coalition that we got, and I know you're going to explain that there was no overall majority, therefore you had to go into coalition with the Conservatives, but I did not vote specifically for an increase in student fees. I did not vote for things like the bedroom tax, and many of the measures that are being put in to check the balance of payments are actually harming those who are least able to afford it. And I would argue, Mr. Clegg, that they go against many of your Liberal Democrat values, and that's why I'm seriously going to struggle to vote for you again this time round.
Well, John, I hope you did vote. In fact, I suspect if you have your well-read edition of the Liberal Democrat Manifesto in 2010, you will have seen the priorities that we very openly put on the front of that manifesto. And I hope you will be pleased that we have delivered, in fact, in some cases, over-delivered on them. On the front page of that manifesto, we said that the four things that we were going to absolutely work to put into practice was, firstly, take lots of people on low pay out of paying any income tax by raising the point at which you pay income tax. We said on the front page of our manifesto we'd raise the personal allowance, in other words, how much you can earn before you pay income tax, to £10,000. As of next week, it's going to be £10,600. We said, secondly, that we would introduce money, £2.5 billion, through the pupil premium to help the education of the poorest children in our society. We've done that, and we're finally seeing the so-called attainment gap, in other words, how well poor and wealthier kids do in schools, particularly in primary schools, narrow. Thirdly, we said we'd play our role to sort out the banks and sort out the economy, and I think we're doing well on that. There's still some way to go. And fourthly, we said we'd push for political reform. I don't think anyone can complain. I understand that people will remind me, and they do, that there was one policy, whatever it was, on page 36 on tuition fees that we were not able to put into practice for all the reasons I hope you're familiar with. I'm not Prime Minister. The Labour Party had introduced fees and then jacked them up, and the Conservatives wanted to see them go up further. But I hope you'll agree that there are hundreds of other very Liberal Democrat policies that we have introduced that do make Britain not only economically stronger, but I think also make society fairer. But look, actually, the interesting thing about your question, John, is I think you said I didn't vote for this coalition and so on and so forth. And of course I understand a coalition was not on the ballot paper last time. I actually think what's different about this election, and it'll loom large in tonight's leaders' debate, is I think increasingly people are kind of acknowledging that no one is going to win outright this time either. And so, in a sense, what you need to choose, John, is A, what party you kind of prefer, but also, which I accept is sort of complex, is which politicians, which parties would you prefer working together after May the 7th? And I hope to persuade you, John, maybe not now, but before you vote on May the 7th, that actually having Liberal Democrats around the table is a good thing, because we keep the government in the centre ground rather than allowing particularly the two larger parties to lurch one way or the other.
Well, keeping with that theme then, Mr. Clegg, about you'd like the electorate to decide with whom they'd like to prefer to work together. Oh dear, you get a cough. That seems to be catching with party leaders of late.
Is it? Who else had a cough?
Natalie Bennett had a shocking cough a few weeks ago. Yes, she did. I
didn't catch it from her.
No, I'm sure you didn't. No, I'm not implying any of that.
No, I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to upset her.
Prefer working together. With whom would you prefer to work together, the Conservatives or the Labour Party?
Well, this is John's decision. Indeed,
no. You said that what you think the electorate needs to decide is probably going to be a hung parliament, so they need to watch the debate and see who would they prefer to work together. Right?
It's called a democracy, so it's for the voters to decide.
So that's what they vote. So who would you like to work together with?
I will follow. Well, I'm a Democrat. I'll follow the instructions of the British people.
You must have a preference.
Actually, funny enough, I mean, I doubt you're going to believe this, but I don't actually think that my whims or wishes or my feelings or my likes or dislikes about this or that other party leader are they're literally completely irrelevant. What is the only thing that is relevant is what are the cards that are dealt to us by millions of people doing this wonderful thing, putting a simple cross next to someone's name in a ballot box on May the 7th. They will tell us what combination is possible. Last time, as you know, the only combination, which could arithmetically yield a government that could govern, was between the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats, and it might be different next time. Now, I don't want the Liberal Democrats to be in power just sort of for the sake of it, but if we can play a role to which is good for the country as a whole, in line with our values and our instincts and our policies, then of course I think the Liberal Democrats should play another role. And I think the alternative of either borrowing too much under Ed Miliband or cutting too much under David Cameron, or having a parliament which looks like a sort of jumble sale of single-issue parties, all kind of haggling with each other day and night. I think the alternatives, frankly, aren't very attractive.
Steve's in Tunbridge, through to Nick Clegg. Go ahead, Steve.
Good morning. In light of the fact that the Conservative Party hasn't conserved anything, I was just wondering, what can the Lib Dems offer us Christian voters, or are we all just dinosaurs?
Steve, I'm sorry, the line was a bit funny. What was the first bit you said?
As the Conservative Party haven't actually conserved anything, what could the Liberal Democrats offer to Steve as a practising Christian, or do you see Christians all as dinosaurs?
No, of course I don't, Steve. And whilst I'm not a man of faith myself, my wife and my children are brought up as Catholics, and many members of my family are very sincere in their own faiths, and it's something I admire enormously in anyone who has faith. I think it must be a wonderful, wonderful thing. Steve,
what can the Lib Dems offer to Christians such as Steve?
Well, I think one of the values that is very central to British liberalism, which I hope would be attractive to not just people of a Christian faith, but others from other religions too, is a belief in treating everybody fairly, to treating everybody as an individual, not sort of judging them unfairly from where they come from or, what their background is, but giving everybody the same chance to live out their dreams, fulfil their potential. That, in a nutshell, is what British liberalism is, and I think that's a good instinct, because it's all about making sure that where politicians and governments play a role in giving opportunity to everybody on the most equal basis possible. And I think that's something which I hope will speak to people who perhaps because of their religion, believe in the values of compassion, openness and opportunity for everybody.
Quick response from you, Steve? Steve, no, we seem to have lost the line. All right, Steve, thank you. Might I be permitted to ask a question?
Well, if you must.
Thank you.
Must.
Thank you very much.
You are known to do this.
As it's reported that in preparation for tonight's debate, the role of Nigel Farage has been taken by your party supporter John Cleese. Who's played the role of David Cameron?
I think that was a bit of an April Fool's by John Cleese. He didn't play that. I'd love to see him play Nigel Farage, I have to say, but it didn't, alas, actually happen. Oh. No, I've done one last week. I did one sort of session where I had members of my team. No sort of public figure that you'd have heard of playing the different roles, and just did that once last week.
And who won?
Well, of course, I did.
As long as it wasn't James. Right, we move on to other calls. Brian's in Hornchurch. You're on the radio, Brian. Go ahead.
Hello, Nick and Nick.
Hello, Brian.
Yes. Hi. I watched a docudrama last week on Channel 4 called Coalition. Just wondered how accurate that was in your eyes to how things panned out.
I didn't see it, Brian. I'm afraid. Did you? What did you think of it?
I thought it was quite good. My main question was, it showed Paddy Ashdown as being in favour of going with the Labour Party more than the Conservative Party on coalition. I just wondered how accurate that was.
Well, I'm sure Paddy would want to speak to you about that himself.
Oh, answer the question, Mr. Clegg. You've been asked the question by Brian.
Yeah.
Lord Ashdown is not here to defend himself. Let's just hear it. Paddy wanted to go with Labour, didn't he?
Brian, I think there were, and I don't know whether this was reflected in that programme, there were, because no one had won the election, there were sort of talks about whether it was possible to assemble a Liberal Democrat Labour coalition.
Which was Paddy's preference.
Well, I think it was the kind of thing that Paddy and others wanted to explore.
No. Stop the sentence after wanted. Take the words to explore out, and
if
we're
you don't
there.
mind, I'd like to use my own verbs and adjectives and adverbs. But and Brian, I had lengthy discussions with Gordon Brown, and I think I was very open about that at the time. But of course, there was never any sort of arithmetical possibility of creating a stable Labour Liberal Democrat coalition, because the numbers quite simply didn't add up. So I think whatever people's sentiments and whatever people wanted, I think the duty to create a government which could actually govern, which could take decisions and carry decisions in the House of Commons, actually led to only one decision, which is yay or nay to a coalition with the Conservatives.
I remind you of the question, which a very simple question. Paddy Ashdown wanted to do a deal with Labour, didn't he? Was the question from Brian.
I think Paddy Ashdown and many others, including myself, wanted to explore all available options.
Brian, back to you. Brian, quick response, if you would.
I'm surprised you didn't watch it, as it would have been, very important to you.
How did Nick Clegg come across?
I know I'm a politician. I know a politician. You think that all politicians like listening to the sound of their own voice, but even I couldn't watch whatever it was, an hour and a half of someone playing myself on a Saturday evening.
How did Nick Clegg come across in the documentary, in your view, Brian? How would you define him in a few words?
I would actually say he came across very sincere, but it basically showed Paddy Ashdown as the elder statesman trying to rule the roost.
Mr. Clegg?
Look, Paddy's a very close friend of mine. He actually is the chair of the general election campaign that the Liberal Democrats that we're running right now. I speak to Paddy several times a day. He's one of my oldest friends in politics. And, you know, the one thing that I can tell you about Paddy, and maybe it's also partly to do with his background, as you know, in the special boat squadron in the military, is I think, you know, Paddy has huge... He places great store on teamwork and the team working effectively together, but at the end of the day, he also respects that the leader at any one time has to take the decisions and the buck stops with the leader. And I think one of the many reasons I'm so full of admiration for Paddy is that even though he has been a leader in the past, he totally respects my role as the current leader, and that he knows from his own experience that sometimes you have to take big and lonely decisions as a leader, and the buck stops with you and nobody else.
Last question concerning this. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being Jeremy Clarkson not having steak and chips, how grumpy was Gordon Brown when you first met him after the last election?
To be fair, he was... Because he and I didn't really know each other much, oddly enough, before we spoke immediately after the last general election, and our exchanges have been, broadly speaking, rather bad-tempered ones for all the House of Commons. But in private, he was he was good-tempered and perfectly gracious. He was very kind of... He did at some point... He was sort of very adamant that he thought that one could create a sort of rainbow coalition of lots and lots of different sort of smorgasbord of lots of different parties. And I do remember saying, look, I just don't think that's ever going to work. And by the way, I still don't think that's going to work. And that might be actually even more of a relevant question after May the 7th. I think this idea that you have a sort of government with a whole array of single-issue parties all pulling this way and that, I think it's a recipe for... Well, it's a recipe for insomnia, as votes will be strung out night after night after night in the House of Commons, but it's also a recipe for a kind of a bit, a sort of messy way of governing the country.
Stuart's in Edgware. You're through to Nick Clegg. Go ahead, Stuart.
Good morning. Happy Easter to both of you.
Happy Easter.
Oh, happy Easter, Stuart, yes.
Lovely.
Well, I just had 2 nurses to work. They've been offered a measly 1%. Well, the government tells us we got no money. We got the smallest army we're going to have since Cromwell. Police being cut back. Prison officers cutbacks everywhere, but you've still got 12 billion for foreign aid, which you're borrowing. God knows what the interest is, what we're having to pay back on that. What's going on?
So, Stuart, I think it is a good thing that, as a country, we have stuck to a commitment we made as a country a long time ago that we would devote less than 1%, so 0.7%, that's all, 0.7% of our national wealth.
Almost the same as the nurse pay rise. She gets 1 or he gets 1.
Sorry?
It's almost the same as that percentage for the pay rise for the nurse that Stuart the caller mentions. It's 1% pay rise.
Well, if you really must, actually, on the issue of pay in the NHS, there are many people in the NHS and public services who get more than 1% because they're on...
Stuart's just delivered 2 nurses to, I imagine, a hospital. They've got 1% pay rise, Mr. Clegg.
Yeah, so there's a 1%...
And £12 billion which we borrowed to send to Malawi.
Well, everybody will get 1% increase. And many will get more if they're on the so-called if they're in a particular pay band in the NHS. But the point that Stuart makes, which is a totally legitimate one, which is, given that we're having to save so much money at home, and we are, and Stuart is right, that, for instance, the police have had to accept about a 20% reduction in total spending on police over the last several years, why are we still honouring this commitment to giving money to other parts of the world? And I think that, controversial though it is something we should be very proud of, that we're one of the largest donors in Syria and dealing with a humanitarian crisis there, that we were able to use that money, for instance, to very effectively deal with the Ebola crisis in West Africa. If we didn't have the money to do that, I'm genuinely convinced that Ebola crisis could have spread to our shores. So it's not just about sort of an act of sort of charity. It's also in our own interest to make sure that violent, unstable parts of the country or parts of the world, or parts of the world which have diseases and epidemics from which we need to protect ourselves, that we have the resources to do that.
Right. Quick response from you, Stuart.
I've never heard of rubbish in my life. It's just a complete, utter waste of money.
Do you really think it's a waste of money, Stuart, to spend money, for instance, dealing with Ebola?
It is. No, because that's a completely different thing.
It's not a completely different thing. It comes from that money.
Hold on. You're giving money to India, which got their own nuclear powers and a space program.
We're barely spending any money on India. But just to answer my question, Stuart, since you say it's all rubbish, do you really seriously want to tell me that it's complete rubbish to help people with Ebola in West Africa? Do you really think it's complete rubbish to help men, women and children who've been raped and traumatised in Syria, who are suffering some of the worst humanitarian...
I'm not saying stop it completely. I'm saying that the $2 billion is enough to spend of this.
12.
That is enough. Listen, why don't you do it? How much? Can I ask you a question, Mr. Clegg? How many billions do you give to cancer research a year?
I don't know the full amount that goes to cancer research.
Not a penny. I asked them. I rang them up and asked them. Cancer research.
Who did you ask?
What did you get the government? Nothing.
Who did you ask, Stuart?
Cancer Research UK. I rang them up and asked them. What did you get off the government? Not a penny. If you want to do this foreign aid, I'll tell you what, why don't you do it by donation? If anyone wants to give to foreign aid, they agree to pay an extra 15% of their wages in tax.
Well, look, for a start, Stuart, it's just simply not the case that the government doesn't give huge amounts to science and research. In fact, it's one of the one areas, as it happens, Stuart, that we have increased and protected over the last several years. The bit that I just don't get, look, you're obviously quite steamed up about this. The bit I just don't get is that you think that it is sort of morally wrong as a very wealthy country compared to other parts of the world, for us to set aside 0.7%, that's all it is, of our total wealth to help some of the most wretched people elsewhere on the planet. You and I are not going to agree on this, but you can't do what you just do. You can't just simply dismiss it as total rubbish. It isn't rubbish to help people suffering from Ebola. It is not rubbish to help...
Mr. Clegg, we've got our own soldiers lying homeless on the streets, like dogs. And you're giving our money abroad. It's not your money, Mr. Clegg. It's my money and the taxpayers' money. We don't want our money given away. I'll tell you what, have a referendum on it. Let's see if the British people want their money given away. You won't have the guts to have a referendum because you know you get slaughtered on it.
Oh, Stuart, that's a ridiculous thing to say. Honestly, you can have your views, but don't somehow claim that you're speaking for absolutely everybody. I can guarantee you there are a lot of people out there who accept we need to take difficult decisions, but equally accept that in this sort of big fluid world of ours where crime crosses borders, where people move in their millions from one continent to the other, where conflicts rage from one place to the next, where disease moves from one hemisphere to the next, the idea that you simply cut yourself off from the outside world and don't pay a single penny to help people elsewhere in the world, and that it's in our own interest to do so because it keeps us safer, it helps deal with extremism, it helps reduce violence, it helps reduce disease. You simply can't dismiss all of that as complete rubbish.
Mr. Clegg, you said we, quotes, barely give any money to India. How much money do we give to India?
I don't know, but of the total, it is a very, very small
£200 million.
And of the total, that is a very small proportion.
A lot of money, though, to nurses.
Look. What do we spend on the NHS? We spend on the NHS. We spend about £80 billion or more.
I think it's more than that, Mr. Clegg.
As you know, we're reducing the amount of money we're giving. We're giving the money to. We're reducing the amount we're giving to India to close to zero. My point that I've made to you in the past and also to Stuart is that the notion that we're going to make ourselves safer or healthier or more secure by simply removing the money that we've set aside for foreign aid, I think is a fantasy.
All right. Email questions. Stuart, do the Lib Dems retain the support of business leaders following the open letter to the Telegraph this week concerning the Labour Party?
Well, the business leader...
This is the letter from the 103 business leaders who said that the coalition actually had achieved a lot and you could, I'm quoting now, risk potential harm if the vote was to go elsewhere.
No, the business leaders, to be fair, if you read the letter, were referring to the overall strategy set by the coalition. They weren't actually saying that it was, the Conservatives who did it, because, of course, it wasn't only the Conservatives who did it. I think the interesting thing about the letter is that it said that the great risk to our economy and to people's jobs is if we lurch one way or the other. In other words, if there is a departure from the course that we have set over the last 5 years. And, of course, that's why I actually think the signatories of that letter should be very careful what they wish for, because a Conservative-only government has been very open. I mean, George Osborne has been quite open about this. He doesn't actually want to follow the course we've been following for the last 5 years. He does want to lurch off in a different direction. He wants to impose ideologically driven cuts on our public services. He doesn't want to ask the very wealthiest in society to make a single extra penny in contribution to balancing the books. The Conservative Party want to jeopardise our position in the world's largest marketplace in Europe. So, I kind of agree with the assertion that the letter writers made, which is that we do need to stay the course. I strongly disagree, and I think they're just flatly wrong if they think a Conservative-only government would maintain the course on which we're on right now.
Rachel in Hastings, I've run a business and it's damn hard work. The Lib Dem and Nick Clegg idea to triple paternity leave is insane. Please ask Mr. Clegg how many businesses he's run. Mr. Clegg, how many businesses?
I haven't, Rachel. But what I have done is spoken to a lot of businesses about this, including just yesterday up in Glasgow. And let me explain. At the moment, as Rachel may know, we have rules ridiculously sort of patronising rules which say if you have a baby, the dad can only take 2 weeks off, usually when the baby's barely aware of dad's existence, and all the leave needs to be taken basically by mum, which is pretty hard and pretty unfair on women who want to go back to work earlier and maybe want to actually have their partner or have their husband take up more of the strain. It's also unfair on those businesses, small and large, who might actually want the mum to come back to finish a project or come back earlier.
Okay.
All I'm saying is that if you want to build on that, because we're now going to make the parental leave taken by mums and dads interchangeable as of this week, if you want to build on that and make sure that dads do play their role and they pick up some of the strain, if you like, if you look at very competitive economies like Germany, like Sweden, what they do is they offer a block of time to dads, and if they don't take it up, they lose it. It's a sort of use it or lose it entitlement. So I think I can give Rachel some comfort that it's not about forcing dads to do that. It's just if they don't do it, they lose it.
For reasons of which you're aware, we have to be fairly strict on time. So just lastly, I've got a couple of pointers for tonight's debate. This is personally, from me, the time we spent together. Mr. Clegg, I'd open with a joke, perhaps quite a dirty gag. I'd pass notes to the other people in the panel, roll your eyes a little bit and just look disinterested and sort of nudge them when Julie Etchingham isn't looking.
Yawn and look at my watch.
Yawn, look at your watch, maybe read a book and some fruity language whenever you can.
Fruity language, so scratch my armpits.
What do you think?
I tell you, your tips, thank heavens we've spoken. Because I was going to do something quite different, but I will do. You watch out for it.
I look forward to it. Thank you for your good humour. We have to say farewell on election call now to Nick Clegg. Thank you. I wish you good luck, as I wish all the leaders good luck, of course, for that. And you'll hear it on LBC. Now, to election call on LBC on Monday, Shadow Justice Secretary Sadiq Khan took your calls on Drive. It was the turn of UKIP's Patrick O'Flynn on Tuesday. Last night, Michael Gove for the Conservatives was on. And this morning, you've just heard from Lib Dem leader Nick Clegg. Stay tuned for LBC's election call. I'd almost took time reading this. Each week in the run-up to polling day. LBC 9:30 News with Lisa Aziz.
The race is on.